Have you ever felt lost when it comes to learning a new piano piece? If you've ever felt like this, then I've got a solution for you in today's video. Hey piano players, this is Warren. I've been teaching piano privately for over a decade now, and today I'm going to show you how to effectively learn a new piano piece. What we're first going to do is look at a concert pianist, how they typically learn a new piano piece for the very first time, and then I'm going to show you how I adapt their approach for my own piano students. Also, make sure to stick around for the last section of the video because I'm going to give you some practice tips that are going to help speed up this learning process for you. Now, there's one important question I want you to ask yourself before we officially get started. That is, how do you define having learned a piano piece? Because if you can't figure that out, then you don't really know what it is that you're aiming for. You need a target to hit. And if you can't answer this question for yourself, then just borrow my answer. I think a piano piece is learned once you're able to perform it. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be able to play it perfectly. It's just to be able to present it somehow pretty decently. Now, I'm not really going to be talking a whole lot about performance because it's a really huge topic that could be an entire video on its own, so I'll leave that for a future video. But I will touch on it briefly in today's video. When a concert pianist gets a piece for the very first time that they've never played before, what they'll usually do is just play through the whole thing from the beginning all the way to the end. It's almost like they're sight reading it. Now, there are two reasons they're doing this. Number one is that they're trying to figure out the form or the structure of the piece. Think about some of the best movies you've watched or some of the favorite books that you've read. You not only like these books or movies because they have good characters, the writing is really good, it's good at acting, the plot is pretty amazing, but it's also because it has a structure or form that you can follow. You get taken along for a ride. And whether it's complex or a simple structure, you're not really confused at any point. And when a book or a movie doesn't have this easy to follow structure, that's when things don't make sense and you don't really enjoy it as much. Now, the second reason a concert pianist will just play through the entire piece is because they're trying to identify where are the most difficult parts or passages. They do this because it's a time-saving tactic, and it's also like a productivity principle. You want to spend most of your time on the difficult stuff, not waste your time on things that are easier. And this is also another reason why their practice is so much better than the average person. They don't want to waste a single minute or even a single second. They're just focusing on the most important stuff right from the get-go. Now, I'm going to share with you one last important concept before we continue on with this video. And the reason why I want to share this with you is because I have really never heard anyone talk about this principle. And to this day, the only concert pianist I've ever heard talk about this is Leon Fleischer. And if you don't know who Leon Fleischer was, he was a legend of the piano industry, and he passed away recently, so rest in peace to this great, amazing pianist and pedagogue. By the way, he was as much an educator as well as a performer. Now, I'm going to summarize an interview he gave one time. Now, what the interviewer was asking him was, how do you get a piece ready for a performance? And what he said was he would practice it as much as possible. Let's say a few weeks go by, maybe even a month, and he has the piece in his fingers, so to speak. And once he got it to that point, he would do something counterintuitive and he would just drop it. Meaning he wouldn't practice it at all. He would just stop practicing that piece. At first it would be for a week, and then he would come back to it and almost as if he's relearning the piece, and then he would drop it again. So each time he was practicing it again, it took less time for him to get it back into his fingers, and each time he stopped practicing it, that duration would get longer. So let's say the first time he wouldn't practice it for about a week, then the next time he cycled through this entire process, he would drop it for about 2 weeks, a month, maybe even 3 months at a time. And after finally having done this for about a year, he told the interviewer, now I'm ready for a first performance. This principle is called spaced repetition. And if you didn't understand any of that, if none of that made sense to you, just think of it as watching a movie again for the second time after a while. If you had the experience that I had, the second time you would watch that movie, it's like you would notice a lot more cool stuff happening the second time around, and it was almost like a different movie. So that's the phenomena of spaced repetition. I want you to remember this idea because we're going to come back to it in the last section of this video. Now, before we continue on with the video, I would really appreciate it if you could hit that like button, because man, these videos take a long time to make, and liking this video would really help a lot to try to get the word out about this. So thanks in advance. Now let me show you the approach I use for my own students, because we have to change it up. We're not like the typical concert pianist. We don't have all day long to practice. In fact, a lot of concert pianists or artists, they don't even have students. They hardly ever teach. And if you're like me, you have a side gig, or maybe you have a part-time job, something that you're busy with, a ton of other responsibilities. So let me show you how I do this for my own students, and you can also apply this to your own schedule as well. All right, so here's how I get them to understand form. Now, if a student is not advanced, then we typically do not play through the entire piece at all. What we do is we start the process of what I call chunking. We divide up the music into manageable parts right from the beginning. By the way, even if you're advanced, I want you to continue to watch this section of the video, because there are probably a lot of things in here that you've heard for the very first time. Now, the reason I have students start this process of chunking from the beginning is because they just don't have enough experience or knowledge to understand form. And this is one way to get their foot in the door, so to speak. Now, I'm not gonna talk too much about chunking because I already made 2 entire videos on this concept. So one of the videos, I go into depth about chunking and how to apply it from the beginning all the way to the advanced levels. And there's also another video I did where I use this idea to teach you how to play the Sonatine in A minor by George Anton Benda. I highly suggest you check out those videos. After the video is over, I will include some links in the video description below. Now, if the student is a beginner or someone who is not familiar with classical music, we don't actually start off with classical music. We start with songs, and the reason we do this is because songs are just easier to understand. It's a structure or form we are familiar with. Whether you are a good singer or not, we just have a lot more experience with songs to begin with. Unless you grew up listening to classical music, then you could probably skip this part. So there's words, we have verses, choruses, hooks. It's just a lot easier to understand, so we will practice the idea of chunking, and once they have enough experience under their belt, then we'll make the transition over to classical music. Now, when they're able to apply this idea to classical music, we have to introduce a different concept because there are no words. So I'm gonna head on over to the piano to demonstrate. So there's really only 2 ideas that you need to know to really start to apply this concept of chunking in terms of classical music, and that is open versus closed phrases. I'm going to demonstrate with Bach's famous Minuet in G major. So if we just take the first phrase, if I ended it there, you see how we have this feeling of openness, that it's not really closed off yet. It's kind of an open loop. And if we continue on with the phrase, you can clearly hear that coming to an end. That open loop has been closed. And that's basically all you need to know to at least get started in terms of understanding phrases in classical music. Another way to think about this idea is question and an answer, tension and resolution, or for you people who go to church, something that's kind of loosely related to gospel, call and response. If you want to study this idea of form and structure even further, I do have a book recommendation for you. I got through about 60% of this book, and in my opinion, that's really all you need. But if you want to do a more deep dive into forms like sonata, concerto, and variations, then that's a really good book to look at. So I'll leave that book recommendation in the description below. slow. And that's really it for understanding form. In my opinion, you should just get started, because even if you don't fully understand this concept, you will learn much faster just by getting more experience and the process of trial and error. Now this next part is going to be for the advanced pianists. Although even if you're intermediate, you're going to get a lot out of this section. One of the main problems of becoming more advanced is that the pieces that you start to work on will become more difficult and longer. It's like what they say in productivity. How do you tackle a huge project? It's like eating an elephant. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. I'm not telling you to eat an elephant, that's just what they say. So if you do that, that's just going to take forever. And if you only focus on that difficult piece, well, that's just one piece for a few months at a time. Now here's some simple solutions for more advanced students. So the first thing I do is pretty simple. I just have them practice musical pieces at easier levels. For one thing, it gives them a mental break from just practicing that one piece. And this is also a way to keep your motivation up. That traditional approach of just practicing that piece for a very long period of time is usually why students end up quitting. They lose motivation because it gets boring, it gets tedious, and they're not seeing much progress. So this is a really easy way to keep the motivation up, and it also helps you fill in the time, helps you extend the practice session. And when you do that, you get more quality work as well as quantity of minutes. And when you're finishing more pieces, there's more opportunities for you to try to learn about form, so you will end up learning this concept a lot faster. Now back to that Leon Fleischer interview that I mentioned in the beginning of the video. If you haven't watched those videos on chunking or you don't understand the concept, I highly suggest you hit pause, watch those videos, and come back. Now what you basically do with these little chunks is label them, because much like what a concert pianist does, once you're able to label the sections, you can figure out which sections are more difficult and which are easier. So you'll spend more time on harder parts and less time on the easier stuff. Personally, I use a software called Anki, and it's what you call a spaced repetition system. I love this software because it just figures everything out automatically for you. And on a laptop, it's completely free. If you want to get it as an app, you do have to shell out some money for it, but in my opinion, that's money well spent. What you basically do is create decks. So a deck could be an actual piece of repertoire that you're working on, and then you're going to input cards into those decks. So the cards themselves just become those chunked sections that we were talking about. The only problem with this software is that it was originally intended for studying, and there are also a lot of people in the language acquisition field who have used this software to rapidly speed up their progress. To date, I don't know anyone else in the music field that uses this software. I've never heard of anyone doing that. I just want to let you know that you're gonna have to tweak some things around. It's not a perfect software for your piano practice needs. Now, if you don't want to use a software, an alternative is called the Leitner system. Maybe you call it the Leitner. I don't know, potato. I haven't used it myself, so I don't really feel qualified to talk about it in this video, but just think of it as a physical version of Anki. Now, I definitely am going to do a future video on the spaced repetition concept. I really hope you try it out, because the benefits that my students have seen, the results are just insane. Because they're able to learn multiple pieces at the same time, they have more fun. They don't just have to work on that one piece. And because of that, you can avoid the traditional approach to a piano performance. If you don't have anything else that you're practicing, you only have that one piece to present for the recital, you create a do or die, sink or swim type of environment. And many students fold under that pressure and have traumatic experiences with piano performances. So the alternative is to use spaced repetition, and instead my students have an entire portfolio or library of pieces that they can pick and choose from, which they've already practiced, and play it relatively stress-free for a performance. Now the last thing I want to say about this approach that I've really advocated in this video is that it's a long-term process. So you will not get a lot of results in the short term. It's not going to be good if you have a tight deadline. But I really hope you stick with it, because this is one of the most powerful ways I've ever learned to do anything in my life. And that's it for this video. There was a lot of information, so in my opinion, you should probably watch this again sometime. And if you have any questions, would love to hear from you in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If it's your first time here, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this video. I'll see you guys next time, and happy practicing.